Hello and welcome to PTA Finance, What Treasurers Need to Know, Part 2. I am Melinda Kirkland. I'm the current California State PTA Treasurer for the 2019-2021 term. Joining me today are Kathy Corzine, current Leadership Commissioner and former Treasurer for the 2017-19 term. And also joining me today is Laura Hawk-Loya, current Leadership Commissioner and nominee for Treasurer for the 2021-2023 term. This is part 2 of a 2-part class. Part 1 was previously recorded, and this class picks up where part 1 left off. Dealing with expenses. Biggest first question that you need to ask when you're ever presented with an expense is it in the budget? Next question is, were the funds released by the association? Has the expense been authorized by the board? It is really, really important to remember that passing a budget does not authorize anyone to spend money or expect reimbursement of funds, okay? Funds have to be released by the association and or authorized by the board as expenses. An authorization for payment or request for reimbursement form must be completed for every single payment the PTA issues. Every one. If you're paying by check, you need a payment for authorization request for reimbursement. If you're doing an online payment, you need a payment authorization request for reimbursement and an online specific form authorizing the transaction. You can find all of these forms that we're referring to in the toolkit, and I encourage you to look there for additional information as well. If someone is requesting reimbursement, that is the person who needs to fill out and sign the payment authorization request for reimbursement form. It is not your job as the treasurer or financial secretary to fill out requests for reimbursement for other people. It is your job as the treasurer to fill out a payment authorization form for any invoices you've received or other bills that the PTA has. Okay. The payment authorization form request for reimbursement should always have receipts attached. If no receipts are available, then that needs to be noted on the form. And the reason why no receipts are available needs to be noted on the form. It's not required, but it is a best practice for any payment for which there are no receipts available to be additionally authorized by the board before the check is written. This is to protect the persons who are writing the checks and make sure that it's clear to everyone that no receipts were received for that payment authorization, but the authorization was approved anyway. Okay, if funds haven't been released and the money has not been authorized to be spent by the board, you may not write the check. Remember, these are not your funds and they don't belong to the board either. These are association funds, and ultimately it is the association that decides when payments can and cannot be made and how much money can be spent on which activities. Okay. This is a sample payment authorization request for reimbursement form. This is in the toolkit. Again, it's not required that you use this specific form. Your PTA may have a different version. You may have your PTA logo at the top, but it is important that your form contain the same information. You need to be sure that you have information about the person being paid. You need to have information about what the expenditure was for and details about the expenditures. If the person is making any donation from any of the expenses to PTA, and the total amount that they are claiming that they need as reimbursement. There's a bottom portion of this form that is for the treasurer's use only, and it is really, really important to note that this form is required to be signed by both the president and the secretary. The president is an authorized check signer in almost all circumstances, and they need to sign this form as approval before payment goes out. And the secretary signature is required because by signing, the secretary is confirming that this payment has been authorized, and they note the date that this payment was approved in minutes. Because it can be kind of complicated trying to figure out exactly whether or not something's been authorized correctly and whether or not you can write the check, we've introduced this term, a new resource in the toolkit. And the title of this fun graphic is, Can We Write This Check? It's a flow chart, as you can see, a decision tree that guides you through whether or not you have met the requirements to be able to issue a payment or write a check. Okay, it's important to note that expenses that are authorized by the board but not yet approved by the association must be voted on by the association at the next meeting. It's also important to note that the board needs to be very, very careful when they authorize expenses that are not approved by the association, because the association always has the right to decline to approve those expenses. And it could be an expensive donation to the PTA if that situation were to arise and an association declined to authorize something that the board had already approved. In addition, there are also limits in your bylaws, and they're specific to your PTA, so you need to check your bylaws for the specific limits, but there are limits in your bylaws as to how much in unbudgeted funds any board may spend in between association meetings, and that is a cumulative amount. It is not an individual payment amount. So your board is very limited in the amount of money that can be spent in between association meetings without approval from the association. Once you have all the appropriate authorizations, writing the check is the next step. Occasionally, you may be doing this as an online payment these days, but the basic steps remain the same. You need to make sure that the payee is clearly noted, the amount is correct, and you verified that it matches the amount that was approved and was listed on the payment authorization form. Checks require 2 signatures. Online payments require 2 signatures of authorization on the online payment authorization form. 2 signatures are required for your protection and for the protection of PTA. No one officer is authorized to spend funds individually without a second person also authorizing that expenditure. It's really important to remember that you should never, ever, ever sign blank checks. Never sign blank checks. The checks always need to be completed before you sign. And it's also important to remember that you should never pay for PTA expenses in cash, with the sole exception being if you've requested and received a cash advance for something. But there's a specific form for that and a process to be followed. And that is cash that has been given to an individual via a check that they can cash, and then they may spend that cash, but no officer of the PTA should ever pay for anything in cash that's withdrawn from the PTA's bank account. All right, we talked in the first part of the workshop about membership and insurance per capita dues as PTA funds that are not belonging to your particular PTA. They belong to either your council, district, state, and national PTAs. So you need to pay those forward as you receive them because it's not your money. Those go through channels. As previously mentioned, through channels means to your council if you're in a council, to your district if you're in district. Then the councils and districts are responsible for sending those things forward to the next level PTA, till ultimately California State PTA forwards the dues that are in the national PTA's portion to national directly. You need to make sure you use a remittance form. Your council or your district should have a specific remittance form for you to use. Typically, the council or district remittance form will have insurance information. It will have due dates on it that are specific to your council or your district, and it may list any other fees or payments that you need to make as a PTA member of that council or district as your unit. There may be a council fee or a district fee, etc. those would be listed on your council or district remittance form, but make sure you use a remittance form for every membership payment that you send forward through channels. In PTA, we have an insurance program that provides insurance to your PTA at a much lower rate than is available in the open market. It's also worth noting that our insurance coverage includes coverages that would not be available to a single entity at an individual school site if they were purchasing insurance on their own. They're only available to us because we purchase insurance for over 3,000 PTAs in California all at once. So, but your insurance must be paid by the insurance due date. Again, check with your counselor district for the specific due date for your PTA, but it's very important that you pay it on time so that those funds can be remitted through channels, and make sure that your PTA is fully covered. Sorry, went too far. Electronic payments. So it's important to note, particularly in this world of changing finance capabilities, PTA units may not have credit or debit cards. So your PTA may not have a credit card. Your PTA may not have a debit card. Your PTA may have a deposit only ATM card. This needs to be an ATM card that is authorized only for deposits and may not be used to withdraw cash. This is so that your PTA could make deposits at an ATM after bank hours, or in the case of a pandemic, when you don't want to be inside a building in person. It's important to know that you can use bill payment services through your banking system. That is allowed, but again, you do have to have payment authorization forms and bill payment authorization forms specifically. Those forms are all available in the toolkit, and we don't want to take the time to go through them individually here, but there is a form that must be signed. Again, it must have 2 signatures. Every PTA payment must be authorized by 2 signers on the checking account. You are also allowed to use large financial processors, such as PayPal or Square. There's a bunch of them out there. We're not endorsing anyone individually, but there are a bunch of processors out there that you may use if you have a PTA online store, if you want to have online membership. There's a variety of reasons why you might want to have, an association account with a financial processor, and you are allowed to do so. It is important to note that if your PTA has an account with a financial processor, such as PayPal, that is considered for audit purposes and treasurer's report purposes to be a separate bank account. So you need to treat it just like a regular bank account and provide reports on it, and it needs to be audited just like a regular bank account. You may not use person-to-person payment apps. It is not acceptable for PTA funds to ever be deposited into anyone's personal account. And it's important to remember that PTAs are businesses. So you should only be using financial processing systems that are appropriate and authorized for business use, both to protect your association's funds and also to make sure that all authorizations and approvals that are required are followed. Remember, your council, district, state, and national PTA dues are PTA funds not belonging to your PTA. They do not need approval from your membership association to be forwarded. Those funds do not belong to you, so you need to send them forward monthly per your bylaws. Totem is the current PTA membership system for online memberships. It is not a system that you are required to use. Your PTA is allowed to have your own online membership collection through your own PTA store or financial processor, or even through My PTEZ if you wish. But Totem is associated with California State PTA. They are our current online official membership platform. They do charge a membership fee per user for the use of the platform. Think of it as a convenience fee, if you will. They also charge a fee on donations that are made through their platform. The PTA actually needs to account for those donations because the fees for those donations, because those fees are deducted from the donation that is being forwarded into your bank account. The membership fee is for the user. It never will show up on any of your statements, and you don't need to account for that in your records. As a reminder, with Totem and only with Totem, your per capita dues are automatically remitted through channels. So you do not need to send through membership dues because for any members that joined through Totem through channels. Those dues have already been remitted electronically and automatically. It's also important to note that you do not have to have a separate audit of your Totem account because it is not a separate financial processor account that your PTA controls those funds. Those funds that are received by Totem are received by Totem and then monthly deposited into your regular PTA bank accounts, whichever one you've designated to receive those funds. So it does not require a separate audit. Non-sufficient funds checks. These are not fun. You could almost take out the S and just say they're not fun checks, right? These are checks that are written that are returned for some reason. You will have them as a treasurer. It is a relatively common occurrence. What you want to do when you receive notice from your bank that you have been deposited a check that's being returned is you need to contact the payers as soon as possible. Most checks will have some method of contact information printed on them. You may also have additional information if it was a PTA member that wrote the check. You want to let the person know that their check was returned, and if you know the reason why it was returned. And you want to make sure that you know that you need to collect not only the funds that the check was written for, but also the bank fees that your bank is charging you for returning the check. Because virtually every bank that exists will charge you fees for a return check. And those are the responsibility of the person who wrote the original check. When you receive funds for a return check, when you receive notice that you have gotten a insufficient funds check, you're going to put that into your financial accounting software as a negative amount into the income amount where the original check was deposited to. Okay. When you're collecting the money back, you're going to use that same income account. Basically, it's important to keep this so that it all reflects actual income received in whatever category that happened to be that the check was for, whether that was membership or a fundraiser, et cetera. When you receive the bank fees back along with the original amount of the return check, you need to deposit those into your bank fee income account. And any bank fees that the bank charges you are going to be bank fees expense account. And if you don't have a bank fee income account, it would be a negative to the bank fee expense. Correct, Kathy?
Yeah, you record the income, the receipt of the reimbursement to the bank fee expense account. Both go, it's a negative expense when you get the money back. So
see, this is why
you want them to zero out.
This is why Kathy and Laura are on this call, because you can be doing financial stuff for PTA for forever, and it feels like forever sometimes, and you still don't know everything. So thank you, Kathy, for clarifying that. Okay, we talked in the first portion of this workshop about some of the reporting that you need to do as a financial officer, a treasurer, financial secretary. If you're a financial secretary, remember that there is information in our toolkit specific to your job and the reports that you need to be completing. So if we say treasurer, but that's not actually your position, we do have more information for you available in the toolkit. And we're not trying to be exclusive to just treasurers here. but primarily those are the people who are taking this class. So you do have to give a treasurer's report to the board at every board meeting. You do have to present authorizations for expenditures or bills that need to be paid to the board for approval. You should be providing an update on your budget with budget to actuals, again, at least quarterly or 4 times a year, but I recommend that you do it at every board meeting if possible. And you also need to be reporting to the board if you've identified any changes that are needed to your budget. So these could be additions or subtractions from programs or fundraisers. It could be adding or removing a line item, depending on the situation that's happening. But remember, you do need to let your board know if you think that changes are going to be needed to the budget. Reporting to the association is very similar to reporting to the board. Again, you have to have a treasurer's report for every association meeting. We talked in the first workshop about every treasurer's report, board or association needs to have the dates covered, listed clearly on it. And your treasurer's reports should run from the end of the previous reporting period. You need to provide to the association a list of checks or payments, if they're electronic versions of payments, that need to be ratified. When you do that, you should make sure that you include the amount, who the payment was to, and what the payment was for. It's also very helpful to include a check number if it was a check. When you're reporting to the association, you're going to have any budget changes that you've identified as needed. So that would include any new activities or programs, any removals of activities or programs you had planned, changes of budgeted amounts for a particular activity or program or fundraiser. And then you're also going to release funds at each association meeting that you need until the next association meeting. And I just want to talk for a minute about why it's important to release funds and the purpose behind that. PTAs don't have debit or credit cards, and we cannot deficit spend, right? We cannot write a check for funds that are not currently in our bank account. So if you have a large expenditure that's expected at the end of the year, you may not, say in October, have the funds in your bank account to pay for that expenditure in October. So you don't want to release those funds as approved when you don't have the funds in your bank account to pay them, right? Perhaps you have a giant fundraiser planned for March, and then that's the funds that you're going to use to pay for that big expense at the end of the year. So we release funds as we go, as they're needed, to help protect the association from funds being spent inappropriately or that we actually cannot afford to spend at the time. Because remember, none of us have a crystal ball, and we can't predict with certainty that what we expect we'll receive for income is what we will actually receive, nor can we 100% guarantee that our expenses will not exceed what we're planning for them to be. So it's important to release funds as we go throughout the year to protect the association and to make sure that we're not spending too much money and we don't end up having enough to meet the needs of the organization.
Can I add something to reporting to the association?
Please.
Make sure that what you're reporting to the association has already gone to the board, your executive board first. You shouldn't be springing anything that the board isn't aware of ahead of time during an association meeting. That's why the executive board is supposed to meet 2 weeks before an association meeting so that they have time to mull over anything that you need to talk about to the general group.
And that's an excellent point. And I would just like to point out that the 2 weeks is actually a requirement in state corporate code. It's not a PTA rule that you have 2 weeks in between board meetings and association meetings in terms of the business discussed. It's actually in state law. So what you can do is simply make sure that if your board meeting is happening within a 2-week period of your next association meeting, that nothing that is on your agenda for that board meeting is also on the agenda for the association meeting. So I know sometimes we don't always end up with a 2-week gap between the two, but there needs to be at least 2 weeks between any business that's been brought up at a board meeting and business that's being brought up at an association meeting. So if you're planning to make a change to your budget, that budget change needs to be presented to your board 2 weeks before the association meeting at which you will be presenting it to the association. And that's, again, not a PTA rule. That's part of state corporate code. And it's just also best practice. Again, as Laura said, you don't want to surprise your board. And the board's job is to help run the PTA. And it's really challenging to do that and do it well if you don't have information in advance. Again, budget to actuals updates should be provided to your association as well. Again, minimum quarterly, but if you happen to meet more than 4 times a year, there is absolutely nothing wrong, and it's encouraged for you to provide a budget to actuals update at every association meeting. Okay, talking about raffles, everybody's favorite topic. Everybody wants to do a raffle, and only nonprofits are allowed to do raffles in this state of California. So here's the website for the Attorney General's specific raffle information page. And I encourage anyone who's considering doing a raffle to visit that page and check it out. It's important to note that you cannot just hold a raffle. There is a registration form required that you must submit to the California Attorney General's office, and they charge a $25 application fee. $20 application fee. I'm pretty sure it's still 20. That fee is non-refundable. So in the event that you apply and they, for some reason, reject your application for a raffle permit, you're still out that fee. In order to be granted a raffle permit, there's some requirements that you have to have met. You must be registered with the Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts and have a CT number, charitable trust number. If you have never registered with the Attorney General's office, you will not be eligible for a raffle permit. You also must be current with the Attorney General's office. And that current means that they consider your account current. It has nothing to do with whether PTA considers you to be current or whether you've met all of your obligations to other agencies necessarily, but it is whether or not the Attorney General's office has received all the reports and forms that they expect from your PTA on time. If you don't have current status, you will be told that you cannot be issued a raffle permit. The final thing that you must have to be sure to be able to be eligible for a permit is you have submitted any previous reports that were due for previously issued raffle permits. Because yes, a report is due when you get a raffle permit. Now, what if you didn't have a raffle? You still have to submit a report and tell the Attorney General's office that you did not actually hold a raffle. If you pull a permit for a raffle, you must submit a report. That is a requirement of the Attorney General's office. If you don't submit a report, they will not issue you a permit for the next year, the next time you apply. So they will also send you some fun, lovely little letters informing you that you have 30 days to submit the report, or they may take actions, etc. You don't want a love note from the Attorney General's office. So make sure that if you do request a raffle permit and are granted one, that it is cleared at the end of your year by submitting a report, even if no raffle was held. And I know this is particularly relevant coming currently because there may have been some things that you plan to do, but given the pandemic, you just weren't able to make them happen. And if the raffle was one of them, make sure you still submit the report. It's important to discuss the distinction between raffles and opportunity drawings. Now, an opportunity drawing is a prize where everyone who comes to an event has an equal chance of winning and no one pays for a ticket. A raffle is defined by the Attorney General's office as a lottery in which each participant buys a chance to win a prize. Okay, so it's really, really critical that you understand the difference between raffle and opportunity drawing, because it's not just a name. I can call something an opportunity drawing and it's still a raffle if it meets all the qualifications and criteria for being a raffle. Likewise, I could misname something as a raffle when it's really an opportunity drawing. For example, I could say that we're going to raffle off a prize to all of the people who come to my next association meeting. Now, unless I'm charging funds for entry into the association meeting, which I couldn't legally do, then everyone who comes to that meeting isn't paying any money for the opportunity to win a prize. That's an opportunity drawing, even if I call it a raffle by mistake. However, if I'm selling tickets to a dinner and let's say silent auction event, and those tickets include an opportunity to win a prize as part of that dinner event, and I've now paid money for that dinner event, that's a raffle, not an opportunity drawing. Okay, it can be challenging trying to determine the difference. And one of the things that we are doing this year at convention is we have a legal and tax aspects workshop for PTA. And we have asked a lovely lady from the Attorney General's office to come and make a presentation as part of that workshop. And we've specifically asked for her to address the difference between raffles and opportunity drawings as part of her presentation. So if you have a chance to catch that workshop, I highly recommend you do. Once it's been completed, it will be available to view afterwards. So again, that's the legal and tax aspects workshop from this convention that you would want to check into. Just a quick reminder on different kinds of raffles. Cow plop bingo is a raffle, requires a permit. A ducky derby would be a cow plop, or excuse me, would be a form of raffle and requires a permit. Also, 50-50 raffles are not legal in California because California's raffle regulations require that there be a defined prize or defined prize payout. And 50-50 raffles by definition don't have a defined prize payout. So those are not legal in California, and your PTA should not be conducting one.
So Melinda, we found out this recently, online raffles are not legal in the state of California. People asked why they see them online. The organizations that are offering online raffles are usually not headquartered in California, and other states may have different laws, but the state of California does not allow them from our organizations.
Correct. And that is important to note. You can advertise something online, but you may not sell tickets for your raffle online. So if you are a PTA in California, which I assume all of you are because you're here in this workshop, you may not sell raffle tickets online in California. That restriction has not been changed during the pandemic. It is still a requirement. Raffle tickets may only be sold in California in person or via check or some kind of mail-in payment. You may not sell them online. So keep that in mind as well. A lot of PTAs like to try and have a casino night as a fundraiser. These are something that you are allowed to do one of per year as a nonprofit in California, but there are some really strict rules around them. First of all, you must have been compliant with all tax filings for 3 years. So if you have not been current with the Attorney General's office for a period of 3 years, you are not eligible to hold a casino night. And that means that if you are not a PTA that has been in existence for 3 years, you are not eligible to hold a casino night. So you may not hold a casino night unless you have been in existence for at least 3 years and been compliant with the Attorney General for that entire time. There is a registration form required. There is a $100 application fee to submit the registration form. Again, that's not a refundable fee. The registration form is not an automatic approval. So you must submit the form and the fee and wait for permission to conduct a casino night from the Attorney General's office. Again, you must have a CT number and be current with the Attorney General. That's required. And it's important to note that there are very strict regulations about what you can and cannot do with casino nights. So I would encourage you to visit the Attorney General's website if this is something that you're interested in doing, and take a look at both the information they provide, and also they actually have some really great frequently asked questions that address a lot of the common questions you might have around this. It's important to make sure that you follow the laws on this because it is considered a form of gambling, which There are very, very strict regulations around. Okay, you may sometime in the non-pandemic, hopefully near future, be holding events at which you wish to serve alcohol. It is important to note that we do not control in PTA the laws surrounding alcohol consumption or service. So that is up to the Department of Alcohol and Beverage Control in California. Once again, there's a theme here. There's strict rules around selling alcohol and serving alcohol in California. Guess what? There's a registration form if you want to hold an event at which alcohol will be served or sold. There's also a fee. I know, it's a shock. And then it's important to pay attention to the fact that there are very, very strict requirements for training for people who are going to be serving alcohol. These again come from Alcohol and Beverage Control. So we highly recommend that if your PTA is going to have an event with alcohol present, that you hire a catering company that is licensed to serve alcohol, and that you do not have PTA volunteers attempt to do so, because you could very easily run afoul of state regulations and laws. PTAs may not purchase alcohol, so alcohol must either be donated or it must be purchased by the person who is consuming it. PTAs may not purchase alcohol. It's important to note that if you are putting alcohol into auction baskets, that counts as selling alcohol under state laws. So you also need to file the report form the registration form, and follow ABC's rules if you have wine in an auction basket, for example. So please, again, visit the state website on the Department of Alcohol and Beverage Control. They have the forms, they have information, frequently asked questions. And if that's something that your PTA wants to do, we strongly recommend you review all those relevant requirements before you begin. Okay. Now that you've finished your year as a PTA treasurer, right? Excuse me, half year, because you're going to be the mid-year audit, going to be 6 months after your term starts. You need to prepare for your audit. Now, we call it an audit, but just to be clear, it's much more of a financial review than a true audit for anybody who in the audience who happens to be a CPA or other public accountant. What we do is pretty much a financial review, but we call it an audit. You want to, as the treasurer, tie up any loose ends. If you have any outstanding payment authorizations, you need to make sure that those get taken care of. And if you have any checks that haven't cleared the bank, you need to research those, right? Try and leave no questions unanswered for your auditor if at all possible. Make sure that your records are organized. Remember that there is an audit checklist in the toolkit that you can refer to so that you'll know what the auditor is going to be looking for specifically. Try and make sure that it's easy for them to find what they're going to need. Again, this is something that hopefully you're keep doing all along as you go, but we know sometimes life happens. And so you may have accumulated a few weeks of papers that need to be sorted and filed appropriately. Make sure that you do that before you hand the books over for audit. Don't force your auditor to go through unorganized records. And then you need to make sure that the records are received by the auditor. Okay, that is your responsibility as the treasurer, is to make sure that those records get handed over. As a new treasurer, we don't want you to accept books from the outgoing treasurer that have not been audited. This is for your protection. Okay, we want you to have the confidence that the records are correct, that the finances as stated are correct. So it's really important that books at the end of a term go from the outgoing treasurer to the auditor, who then hands those books over to the incoming treasurer. So please make sure that you don't take unaudited books if ever you can. So We have, by the way, an entire class devoted to audits. So if you are an auditor or you want to know more about that process, you can listen to the lovely Laura talk about audits till your heart's content as another workshop offered at this PTA convention. Okay, the subject near and dear to my heart. You guys are thinking I'm crazy, and you might be right, but it's still true. Tax filings. Again, as I've mentioned during this presentation, PTAs are businesses, and there are government regulations we have to follow. One of those big requirements that we have to meet is that we are required to file 3 annual returns with 3 different agencies, and annual means every year. You don't get to take a year off. So we have to file a return with the IRS. We have to file a return with the California Franchise Tax Board, and we have to file a return with the California Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts. Okay. The specific forms that you have to file depend on your gross receipts for the year, but they're listed here in terms of the options. If your PTA normally has gross receipts, total income, the only exception that's not included in that gross receipts is PTA funds that do not belong to your PTA. But gross receipts of $50,000 or less, you can usually file what's called an e-postcard 990N with the IRS and an e-postcard 199N with the California Franchise Tax Board. Those are fairly simple, fairly easy forms that anyone should be able to do if you have accurate treasurer's records to work from. If your PTA normally has receipts of more than $50,000, you're going to either need to file a 990 EZ or a full 990 with the IRS and a 199 with the California Franchise Tax Board. The California Attorney General's office is a little different. Regardless of how much money your PTA has made in a year, you must file an RRF1 form every year, every PTA. It's not optional. Where they are different is that they charge you fees based on what your gross receipts were. So if your gross receipts were were $25,000 or less, currently the form has $0 in filing fees, but above $25,000 in gross receipts, there is a filing fee, and it goes up incrementally based on your gross receipts total. What's new as of 2020 is that the the California Attorney General's office is now requiring an additional form. This is in addition to the RF1 for any PTA, any nonprofit as well, that files an IRS 990 e-postcard. So if you file a 990N e-postcard with the IRS, you will file with the Attorney General's office an RRF1 and a CTTR1. And if you file a 990 EZ or a 990 with the IRS, the California Franchise Tax Board, the California Attorney General's office has required for quite a few years that you include a copy of that filing with your RRF1 report to them, and that requirement has not changed. So the long and the short of it is now everyone will be sending an RRF1 to the California Attorney General's office along with something else. It will either be a copy of your 990 EZ or 990 IRS filing, or it will be the Attorney General's new CTTR1 Treasurer's Report form. Remember, failure to file any of these forms can equate to fines for your PTA and potentially loss of your tax exempt status, which is not something any of us want to see happen. So please make sure that you are aware of which returns your PTA needs to file and that those filings are completed. As a reminder, PTA treasurers are not required to complete the tax filings, although they may, but they are required to ensure that the tax filings are completed on time. Okay, your PTA, depending on your income and any other situation, may need to hire a professional accountant or certified tax preparer to file your PTA's taxes. It's important, though, that if you do hire a professional to help you with your tax filings, that person is familiar with nonprofit returns and knows how to do nonprofit returns. They're not the same as individual or personal returns. So make sure that the person you hire is familiar with nonprofit returns. When are your forms due? Well, they're due 4.5 months after the end of your fiscal year. So if your fiscal year ends June 30th, your tax forms are due by November 15th. You should be uploading copies of your tax filings to My PTEZ, which was formerly known as PTAEZ, and your council or district may ask you to provide copies directly to them as well. Follow your council and district's directives on that. We have a tax filing support assistant at California State PTA, and we have a tax filing support center section on our website, which has a lot of information and a lot of help available to you. So this is the link where you can find most of that information. And you can also find the link to email our tax filing assistant, Donna Broussard, if you need assistance with this at your PTA. Remember, PTAs have somebody there to help you at all times. So make sure you talk to your counselor district if you're having problems or need help. And if you need additional help, we have resources for you at State PTA as well. Okay, we went through this on the previous slide, but just to be clear, okay, because it's new, everybody has to file these filings. Everybody has to file an RF1, and everybody has to file the RF1 and attach something. You're either going to be attaching your IRS 990 or your 990EZ, or you're going to be attaching the new CTTR1 Treasurer's Report form if you filed a 990N, okay? And remember, if the filing fees are based on your annual revenue, the Attorney General's office will not process your filing if you do not include fees and they're required. So you will get a incomplete status that eventually could turn into a delinquent status if it's not cleared, if you don't send them a payment and a payment is due. So make sure that you take care of filing with the Attorney General's office. And if you owe them money, please make sure that you send it to them. Finally, we just want to talk for a minute about non-cash contributions, which are also often referred to as in-kind donations. These can be goods. It could be a case of water for your fun run, or they could be services. You might find a volunteer who is in their professional life a certified tax preparer who's willing to file your PTA's taxes at no charge. Okay, that would be a donation of an in-kind or non-cash contribution service. You need to track non-cash contributions that you've received, including which programs or activities or fundraisers they are applied to. This is not a PTA requirement. This is a government requirement, because all of the tax forms that we just finished talking about, all of them will ask you about non-cash contributions. So regardless of how much your gross receipts were for your PTA for the year, you will need to report non-cash contributions to someone, either the IRS or the Attorney General's office, or both. Okay, so which specific forms and where they need to be reported is, I'm not going to give you the line items for the 990EZ where you'd report it, et cetera, but trust me that you do have to report it either to the IRS or to the Attorney General's office, or both. And so you need to be tracking it. It's important to note, if you're not comfortable tracking non-cash contributions in your financial accounting software, whatever that is, you don't have to account for it in your financial accounting system. You may track non-cash contributions by hand on paper, if that's what you choose, in an Excel spreadsheet, whatever works for you in terms of record keeping. What's most important is that you do your best to track them. I also want to remind you that the IRS requires a donation receipt be provided to anyone who donates goods, services, or cash or check that is valued at $250 or more. So be sure that if someone makes a donation to your PTA, whether that's a non-cash contribution or cash contribution, that you are providing a donation receipt on request for any amount, and absolutely for any amount that's $250 or more. That is a government requirement. Kathy, Laura, any final comments?
Thank everybody for coming.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
taking the time to listen to these workshops. We know that you are doing great things for kids, and we so appreciate all that you do, including taking the time to try and make sure that you are learning everything you need to know to do the best job you can at your position. If you need additional information, there's been a variety of sources provided throughout this presentation, but also there's always our California State PTA website. And in the event that you need even more help than that, leadership@capta.org is an email address that will always reach the current vice president of leadership, and treasurer@capta.org will always reach the current treasurer at California State PTA. So those are resources that will not change regardless of who's in the office. They will be there for you to use when you need them. Thank you so much and have a great day.